what I love about the theme of this year's conference is it seems to really cater to someone like myself who is just kind of starting on a different path than maybe what they're used to. And so this year's theme is the promises and the pitfalls of spirituality. Why this theme and why now?
Well, I think spirituality offers tremendous promise, and it certainly offers tremendous pitfalls. I think it's a paradox. Spirituality has been responsible for the civilizing of humanity over the centuries. It's been responsible for incredible acts of compassion and generosity and great charity all over the world for centuries. It's also, in some ways, been responsible for a great deal of wars and prejudice and negative things that have happened as well around the world. So there are pitfalls, and there's tremendous promise within spirituality.
Specifically, when we're discussing the pitfalls, from what I understand, there may be a certain element of people who are spiritual guides or people who claim to have a certain knowledge and maybe trying to teach it before they're ready, or perhaps people trying to jump into something alone, or perhaps people going along the wrong path because it's the trendy thing to do. Do you find that increasing more and more, especially in the West?
I don't know about increasing, but there's a lot of it.
Okay.
And recently I was going through YouTube, one of the great reference places on the net, and I was looking at videos under various titles, including spiritual guidance, spiritual counseling, and some are deep and rich discussions by people who themselves have had years of experience guiding others and pursuing their own spiritual lives, and others are talking about funny cult versions of spirituality and people who are channeling Lord knows what. So there's a real mix out there. There really is. And I think that's part of the job of ITP as a graduate school in transpersonal psychology, to train people to do their own inner work so that the way our graduates do spiritual guidance, the way our graduates both teach about spirituality but work spirituality into their work as counselors, therapists, etc., that it's grounded in their own inner work, that they have done their own inner work and have a certain psychological and spiritual maturity. Because I don't care what you've learned, you can have learned tremendous technique, but if you yourself haven't done your own work, it's not going to work very well.
I was reading another article where you were featured, and you had mentioned a book called Halfway Up the Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
I think you had mentioned that, and that was so, what's the word I'm looking for? It was so strong because this whole idea of some people can get to a certain point and I think they've got it all,
Right.
and they're ready to teach. And that's certainly a pitfall as well, but when are you done?
Never.
Right.
Because the problem with that metaphor is the mountain doesn't have a top. One of my old teachers, a wonderful Zen master, said, basically it's an endless mountain. Moving toward the infinite doesn't have an end point. And as a good Zen Buddhist, she said, you're always climbing. And the climbing is the process. The process is the end. And you bow to those who have been climbing longer, and those who are a bit behind you on the path bow to you, and you bow back, and honoring each other, honoring everybody else in the process, but no, one isn't finished. Now, I know that there are some spiritual systems that do say you're finished, but I kind of like this one. I think it's more realistic. And I think there are problems when you think you're done. And I'm really allergic to the idea of perfect masters wandering around, because I don't think human beings are perfect. And the problem is, if you claim to be perfect, then you're going to rationalize away all your mistakes. And so will your followers. And there's an awful lot of, I think, really bad teaching and bad spiritual leadership that happens when you take that position. I think it's one of the great pitfalls of spirituality, is to think one is perfect. A related one is to think your teacher's perfect so you don't have to do your own spiritual work. You know, my teacher is so wonderful, my teacher is so good. So what? You know, it's as though you can have the best coach in the world, but if you don't run, you know, if you don't run your miles, you're not going to be a good runner. Doesn't matter how terrific your running shoes are or how wonderful your coach is, you have to do your own work. And I think that's true of spirituality as well.
So, I don't want to put it in harsh terms, but say for a consumer of spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know? How do you know whether or not this person that I'm looking to for guidance is someone who's the real thing, or whether they're somebody who themselves is not even ready?
Well, you have to trust your judgment to some extent. I mean, how do you know that you're going to go to a good therapist? How do you know that you're going to a good physician or a good chiropractor? You know, one of the things you do is you ask. You know, you get referrals, you ask your friends. You call ITP. We would refer people that we know, our own graduates, our own faculty. But you, in all those cases, whenever you hire a professional, you have to use good judgment. And, you know, I think sometimes people think that they should park their intelligence at the door when it comes to the spiritual. And I think absolutely not. You know, that any teacher, any system that says, don't use your common sense, don't use your intelligence, that this is beyond, you know, what you know and we know more than you, run. Don't walk to the nearest exit, because I think common sense and intelligence, using your own judgment is critical, you know, whether it's working with a therapist or counselor or a spiritual guide or spiritual teacher.
So in your keynote address, what are some things that you're hoping to inspire or instill in the attendees?
Well, my approach to the whole issue of spirituality is, number one, something I learned from my Sufi teacher many years ago, which is there's one religion. As he put it, there's only one divine truth, there's only one God, there's only one reality with a capital R. So we're all worshiping the same reality. We may use different names for it, but fundamentally it's the same process, and so there really is one religion. Furthermore, I think every religious tradition is looking at reality, this huge divine reality, from a slightly different perspective. So it's not that one is right or wrong, just the opposite. We actually need every perspective to understand the truth. And so we need not to merely tolerate each other, but to honor each other's traditions and learn from each other. Because if I say, you know, I can see reality through this one little lens, this one little window, and that's all I want to see, it's like that wonderful old story, which I think originally comes out of the Sufi tradition, because I think everything comes from the Sufi tradition, because I'm biased, but the great story of the blind man and the elephant. You know, if you say my religion's the only way, and you grabbed a hold of the trunk and you insist that the elephant, you know, is like a huge hose, and, you know, if someone else says, no, it's different, well, it's because each of them is wedded to only one way of looking at this greater reality. So I think it's really important that we really look at spirituality from a variety of perspectives, from scientific perspectives, from the perspective of the psychology of consciousness, from the world's great religious and mystical traditions, that we really need each other to really look at this tremendous topic from a variety of different positions. That would be, and then if we cut anything out, we're diminishing our understanding. That's one. I think we also need to insist that the goal is unity, that not similarity, but that we really are engaged in the same process, and that we shouldn't use religion or spirituality to separate us, to insist that one system is better, you know, one system is the truth and everybody else is a little worse. And there are various ways of doing that, sort of, you know, every once in a while I shudder when I hear there's one way of meditating correctly, and guess what, it's ours. And these are usually from people that have never tried any other way of meditating. There's a wonderful story in Rumi's great work, the Mathnavi, in which Moses is in the desert and he sees this nomad, and the nomad is praying to God, and The nobody's saying, "Oh Lord, I love you so much, and I want to bathe your feet, and I want to comb your hair." And and Moses, this great teacher of monotheism, said, "You're just so wrong. God, you can't wash God's feet. God is infinite. You can't comb God's hair. This is terrible. This is blasphemy." And Moses, he was a prophet of God. He had incredible power, and the poor man runs off crying into the desert that his whole way of worshiping has been blown apart. And God comes to Moses in a vision, and God says, "How dare you tell my servant, this beloved devotee of mine, that his way of worshiping isn't any good? But Lord, you taught me." He said, "He was worshiping me the best that he knew how, and I accept his worship. Besides, I sent you here to teach unity, not to break unity." And Moses runs into the desert, and takes him days to find the man. And the man is transformed, because the good news was, by breaking apart his own way of worshiping, he went into a place of openness and emptiness and experienced God in a whole new way. But I love that line where God says, "I sent you here to unify people, not to create separation." And I think that's really important, and I think it's a message. I don't find the problem within transpersonal psychology, but I think it's a message we need to bring to the world's religions. We need to bring to the world's different traditions.
So you don't feel as if those who are maybe practicing along the transpersonal route, that there's no, do you feel as if they do have that unity as far as being transpersonal practitioners or psychologists or whatever that they are? Do you feel as if there is no separation? Do you feel as if there is no argument or no debate as far as to how to do things?
No, God forbid, we shouldn't. I don't want us to not argue. I want us to have diversity. I think argument, conflict is great, but I want us to hold it in the larger context, that we're all engaged in this together, and that there isn't one truth and everyone else is a priori wrong. I think we can each kind of fight for slightly different positions, but I think we really need to hold to the notion that we're all open-minded. In a sense, we're all scientists, and I think to be a scientist is to be open-minded, and to be open to the investigation of truth, and to realize that our understanding at any given point in time is always going to change and hopefully deepen.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add, or that you wanted to point out? I saw you had some notes.
Yeah. And I think one of the other great messages that spirituality teaches us is that we as individuals, as individual practitioners, our students and our clients, we all have inner wisdom for understanding of deep and profound truths, and that's within us. That wisdom is within us, the capacity for health is within us, the capacity for deep understanding is within us, and that in effect Plato was right, it has to be drawn out from us, but it's already there. And for me, that's one of the great implications of spirituality. I think psychology still suffers from the sort of medical model that Freud used, in which you go to a professional, like you've got the flu and you go to the doctor, and the doctor's healthy and you're not, and you don't know what to do about it, and the doctor knows what medicines you should have, and so you kind of throw yourself into the hands of the professional. Well, I think our endeavor is very, very different, really the opposite, which is we come knowing in many ways better than anybody what we need. Now we as transpersonal guides and teachers want to help people find that inner wisdom, want to help people develop their own judgment, develop their own discernment and ability to understand, but that fundamentally that's within, and that our job is to really help people deepen their own understandings. That's a very different approach to teaching. It's a very different approach to therapy or counseling or spiritual guidance than this other sort of listen to what I say because I'm the professional.
It seems it's a theme of service almost.
Service is really a big part of it. convinced that, you know, probably service is critical in doing one's own inner work anyhow. That without service, in fact, without service, the transpersonal becomes a sort of navel-gazing occupation, you know, which is narcissistic, you know, and self-defeating. I think with service, we deepen our own growth, and with praxis, I mean, with actually practicing the, you know, spiritual principles, transpersonal principles, we test them out in the real world, which is also because, as one of my colleagues, Charlie Tarr, who's really the founder of the psychology of consciousness, said, we're engaged in a field where there's all kinds of ancient traditions and ancient wisdoms and writings, and he said probably 50% of them are just golden. I mean, they're really, really priceless, and the other 50% are wrong. And the problem is we don't know which 50% is which. So we have to keep evolving, and we have to keep an open mind. It's searching for, you know, is what we think we know, in fact, so. That's part of, I think, the whole scientific endeavor.
And part of the conference is to maybe expand and let people know a little bit more about what's out there, and what sort of the new findings that are coming out, just focusing on the conference. What's kind of the goal, along with what your keynote address, what you were talking about, but what's the goal as far as the people who are going?
Well, I think it's going to vary, because I think we always get some people who've never been to a transpersonal conference before. We may have some who are well-trained psychologists, but who haven't been that much exposed to the role of spirituality within psychology. Then we have our own students, our own faculty, and our colleagues who have been doing transpersonal for years. And so that differs, but it's a chance to explore our latest thinking on a variety of issues, and as well as some people are going to be talking about their research. And their experience as researchers, as well as, you know, some of us will talk about our experience as educators. I'm more of an educator than a researcher myself. So.